naivety to say I'm a financial man and we often look at things the other way around or upside down, which is obviously not the way academics tend to look at things. And to what extent, when you look at your clock, it's an hour to midnight and this is the success of socialism, do you think it might be the other way around in South Africa? The NDR has been going for 30 years. The commanding heights, the economy is still in the hands of the private sector, the banking industry, the health industry, the pension fund industry is all operated fairly effectively by private sector money and private sector structures. So they always say socialism breaks down when you've got nothing more you can nationalise or seize. Now the state has tried to seize whatever it can. It hasn't been particularly successful in certain aspects of it. And the private sector still survives to some extent. So could we say that maybe if they can't achieve success very quickly on some of these socialist ideals the ANC has, that we could be looking for the clock to start turning the other way around? That the private sector is now being asked to provide the assets and the services that the state can't provide. That's not what the politicians want, but on the ground that possibly is what happens. Because I think South Africa's had a long, and Venezuela was quite quick. A lot of these others have been quite quick. We have 30 years of this socialist revolution, and it hasn't achieved a lot, really, in terms of delivering to the people.
Yes, no, delivery to the people it certainly hasn't achieved. But I think the worst interventions, as I said, still lie ahead. I think that once we have the expropriation bill in place, the government, if it wants to, will be able to move fast, not only against land, but against a whole range of businesses, because it won't just be property is defined in the Constitution and in the expropriation bill as not limited to land. So we have insight into many of the propositions which lie before us, from expropriation to NHI to the National Social Security Fund and so on. I think the ANC has been going as fast as it feels it can. The first 10 years were a difficult period because of the collapse of the Soviet Union. You needed time for the world socialist movement to revamp. And what you also want as part of the NDR is to take advantage of private sector resources. That's terribly important. So now that we've reached the point where Eskom really is crippled, it's fine to use the private sector resources provided they don't have control. And so you will increasingly hear ANC people saying, yes, we will, we're bringing in the private sector. We're not going to give them leadership. We're certainly not going to give them ownership or control. After a certain period, these assets are going to be ours. It's perhaps most notable in the deal that's being done with Transnet over the Durban port, where the Philippine company that is willing to make resources available is going to become a shareholder in a new entity. But in that new entity, Transnet will have a 51% stake, and the Philippine company will have a 49% one. So resources will flow from the company in order to improve the port and hopefully get it operating much faster. But after 25 years, all those assets will actually pass to the state, which will retain ownership and control all the way through. And I think what the ANC also specializes in is reassuring business. Say with the MPRDA, don't worry about us taking custodianship, because you're going to get new mining rights in place of your old mining rights. And there's the 26% HDSA ownership requirement for historically disadvantaged South Africans, but that's immutable. We'll never change it. And then after a while, it becomes a 30% requirement, as it is now for new mining rights. And in the agricultural sphere, the taking of trusteeship or custodianship was again accompanied by many reassurances, but nothing will immediately change. You'll still have the water use that you have now, and that it will continue. It just will be under the state's control, and there'll be reviews, and it can't last more than 40 years. But now suddenly we find a draft regulation that says that if you're going to use a large amount of water, then you must have 75% black ownership. So having been kind of cajoled, and I'm not criticizing the private sector here, I think it's an enormously difficult thing for directors to do. There's obviously an incentive to go along, to get along, and to hope that the promises will be upheld and that the degree of state control that you can see already will not be too damaging. But the stakes can always be changed. Yeah? I think Frans Cronje has said once you've given up the principle of your ownership of your business and they want 25%, well, when they come and say they want 50% or 70%, it's just detail.
Hi, Terry Markman speaking. Anthea, it seems to me that this is not so much a practical debate or argument, but an intellectual one. So my first question is, to what extent do you think that this debate can be won, call it a debate, but this fight can be won by just the practical argument of saying that it's just impractical for the state to run things, or we have to bring in the intellectual moral argument? My question to you is, surely this is an intellectual battle as much as just a practical one.
Well, I think one must bring intellectual arguments, but one must also raise as many facts and warning elements as possible. And I think that what has happened over the years, if you stop and look at it, shows this constant encroachment of the ANC, where it says it's taking X and then it takes more. And it says it's working in this area, but then it goes to that one. And one can hope that business can now really see that this encroachment hasn't got an end that business would like. And also, I think there is now a certain disillusionment with the ANC. Of course, the vast corruption, the vast inefficiency, the vast incompetence all indicates that business resources are necessary. The risk is that business will feel so pleased about being able to help that it won't understand the NDR strategy of using business resources for the benefit of the revolution and sort of having swallowed them going forward with the revolution just the same. So it's vital that business should really wake up to the risk that it faces and see, I think, that this is not just in South Africa. Here it's the NDR. That's what suits our particular circumstances. In other countries, it takes other formats. For example, the emphasis on critical race theory in the US, where, again, you've got an oppressor group and a victim group, and the only way to end the victimization is for the victims to rise up and overturn the oppressor, which is a very Marxist sort of idea. And that's now being inculcated into the schools, which people are getting worried about. So to see that this is a kind of an octopus that spreads very far, potentially, and one must be able to act against it in every way, with the argument that capitalism works far better, with the argument that capitalism really helps people to get out of poverty. All the data that's been assembled through the Economic Freedom of the World reports over decades is extremely useful. One would think, in persuading people that capitalism has value, real value to the poor, because it helps them far more than socialism ever will. And this is a message that we must increasingly get out too. And in South Africa, we're actually pushing at an open door in terms of what ordinary people think, because they aren't imbued with radicalism. I think Bill Johnson was interested when he was asking questions more recently of the EFF. And he said, well, if you had a choice between getting a job and having an expropriated farm, EWC, they said, well, we'd like the job. And that's fortunate, because so long as we don't have a terribly radical populace pushing for the kinds of things that the ANC elite wants, then we can help to forge a moderate majority that is in tune with practical solutions for South Africa's problems.